Because I am too. I'm very excited to be on it, to talk shop about everything, to like bullshit.
It's fair to say at this point that hardly anyone can tolerate the star of this movie. From the very beginning, Rachel Zegler positioned herself not as an actress grateful for the opportunity to play one of the most beloved fairy tale characters in history, but as someone who believed the entire story was outdated, problematic, and in desperate need of her personal reinvention. Instead of respecting the legacy of Snow White, she treated the role as if it were beneath her, mocking the prince, dismissing the dwarfs, and turning every interview into a lecture about patriarchy, privilege, and social justice. What should have been a magical, family-friendly revival turned into a constant reminder that Disney had cast someone who appeared to hate the very story she was supposed to bring to life. Rather than embracing the charm and innocence of Snow White, she turned the press tour into a stage for herself, painting critics as entitled, privileged voices who had no right to question her approach. When she declared she was not a damsel in distress waiting for a man to save her, it wasn't just a modern reimagining, it was a direct rejection of the original character's essence. Audiences didn't see a fresh take on a classic. They saw an actress dripping with arrogance, dismissiveness, and a sense of superiority that alienated fans before the film was even released. Disney, meanwhile, only made matters worse by embracing changes that came across less as inclusive and more as pandering. One of the most talked about decisions was replacing the iconic seven dwarfs with a mismatched group of so-called magical creatures. The choice was baffling. Instead of bringing visibility to actors with dwarfism, something that could have been both empowering and respectful, Disney erased them almost entirely, leaving only a token dwarf among the group. Critics and fans alike pointed out the hypocrisy. If the concern was about stereotypes, why not rewrite the dwarfs as complex, fully fleshed out characters instead of erasing them altogether? As Peter Dinklage himself noted, there is power in putting 7 actors with dwarfism on screen in a massive Disney blockbuster. That opportunity, however, was taken away in the name of shallow optics. And in doing so, the studio managed to offend both traditionalists and advocates for representation. And then there's Rachel herself, whose attitude throughout the process seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. She compared herself to timeless works of art, insisting that despite her flaws and cracks, people would still line up to see her, just as they do for damaged statues in the Louvre. She projected the image of someone untouchable, convinced that her millions of followers guaranteed success no matter what. But when the movie finally hit theaters, the reality was sobering. Instead of packed audiences, theaters were nearly empty. People documented showings with only 1 or 2 attendees, revealing just how wide the gap was between Rachel's self-perception and the public's interest. This growing disconnect has turned her into more than just a controversial actress. It's made her a cultural punchline. Even Rick and Morty, the animated series known for satirical jabs, has circled back for another dig at her. The writers apparently believe there's still plenty of comedy to be mined from her arrogance, her tone-deaf interviews, and the disastrous reception of Snow White. Fans of the show are already buzzing about how brutal this next parody might be, and the fact that she's becoming a recurring target only underscores how deep the backlash has cut. Once you're reduced to a running joke in pop culture, it's incredibly hard to escape that label. At the heart of this disaster is a simple truth. Audiences wanted a faithful retelling of Snow White, something magical and nostalgic, with perhaps a few modern touches handled gracefully. Instead, they got a lecture on social issues, a reimagined story stripped of its original charm, and a lead actress who seemed more interested in belittling critics than winning over fans. The film's failure was almost inevitable because it betrayed both the spirit of the source material and the trust of the audience. People didn't see inclusivity or empowerment. They saw arrogance, entitlement, and corporate pandering masquerading as progress. The result? A box office flop, a damaged reputation, and a career moment for Rachel Zegler that may haunt her for years. Hollywood gambled that her online following and woke persona would translate into ticket sales, but the opposite happened. Instead of being remembered as the new face of a Disney princess, she's become the face of one of the studio's most embarrassing missteps in recent memory. Snow White was supposed to be a timeless story of love, kindness, and hope. Under Rachel's shadow, it became a symbol of Hollywood's disconnect from its own audience. And when the dust settles, people won't remember the film for its artistry or message. They'll remember it as the movie that proved even Disney isn't immune to the consequences of arrogance, poor casting, and ignoring the fans who matter most. Rachel Zegler continues to find herself at the center of brutal headlines, ghosted studio calls, and mounting fan rejection. For someone already fighting to salvage her public image, becoming the punchline of a Rick and Morty roast is the absolute last thing her team wanted. Reports suggest she's privately furious about the parody, which reportedly leans into every public criticism leveled against her. Combative in tone, disconnected from fans, and seemingly more interested in activism than in acting. For an actress struggling to repair her Hollywood reputation, being mocked yet again by one of TV's most unhinged animated shows might just be the most humiliating blow of all. But to truly understand how Rachel Zegler ended up in this precarious position, fired from Disney projects, dropped from voice work in Toy Story 5, and facing a wave of industry pushback, you have to rewind to what once looked like a Cinderella story in the making. Not long ago, Rachel was hailed as Hollywood's next big breakout star. After a critically acclaimed performance in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, she was thrust into the spotlight, winning awards, magazine covers, and massive hype. Her casting as the lead in Disney's live-action Snow White was supposed to be her crowning moment. Playing one of the most iconic princesses in history should have cemented her status as a household name. But what should have been a dream role quickly unraveled into a nightmare. Not because of the film itself, but because of the discourse surrounding it. Rachel's interviews began drawing attention, not for excitement or reverence for the character, but for the way she tore down the original 1937 film. "It's no longer 1937, she quipped in one viral moment. She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be." While some praised this as a bold, modern stance, others saw it as condescending, dismissive, and even hostile toward the story that had charmed generations. Things only escalated when Rachel mocked the prince in the original film, claiming he literally stalks Snow White, and brushed off the story as weird and outdated. These comments weren't received as progressive. They were seen as ridiculing the very foundation of the fairy tale. The backlash was immediate and widespread. Social media exploded with criticism. Memes and hashtags like "girlboss Snow White" trended for all the wrong reasons, painting Rachel not as a trailblazer, but as an actress out of touch with the audience she was supposed to win over. As more interview clips surfaced, the backlash snowballed. Every appearance became fuel for criticism. Every red carpet interaction was scrutinized. Instead of being remembered as the fresh new face of Disney magic, she was branded as dismissive and arrogant. Fans began asking a simple but devastating question. If the star of Snow White seemed to hate Snow White, why should audiences care? Why should audiences care?
The film's flop was really to be expected, not only because people are sick of remakes, but because Zegler was doing what Zegler does best and ran her.
Adding to the storm was Rachel's dynamic, or lack thereof, with co-star Gal Gadot, who played the evil queen. On stage together during awards season, the awkward body language was undeniable. Their Oscars presentation in particular became a talking point. Fans noticed the absence of chemistry, with Gal appearing to distance herself from Rachel both physically and publicly. Rumors circulated that behind the scenes, relations weren't much better. The contrast was stark. Instead of presenting a united front for one of Disney's biggest projects, the two leads seemed worlds apart. Meanwhile, Disney's silence only made things worse. The studio issued no strong corrections, no fresh messaging, and no course adjustment. As the criticism piled up, Disney appeared content to push forward as though nothing was wrong. But the finished product didn't help their case. When the live-action Snow White finally hit theaters, it bore little resemblance to the beloved original. The iconic dwarfs were gone, replaced with a hodgepodge of magical creatures. The prince, too, was largely erased from the story. The entire tone had shifted from timeless fairy tale to politically reworked allegory. Fans who had grown up with the classic were left confused, asking whether this even qualified as Snow White anymore. To make matters worse, leaked details suggested that in this reimagining, the name Snow White didn't even come from the fairness of her skin, a detail central to the original tale, but from surviving a snowstorm. What once seemed like harmless creative license now struck many as a deliberate attempt to deconstruct the story rather than retell it. The box office reflected the disconnect. Despite Disney's marketing muscle and the brand power of the Snow White name, the movie opened to underwhelming numbers and failed to generate momentum. It wasn't the first Disney live-action remake to struggle, but it was by far the most divisive. Instead of nostalgia and magic, the movie became a lightning rod for criticism about corporate pandering, misplaced priorities, and the dangers of casting an actress who seemed at odds with her own role. And now, rather than fading into the background, Rachel's performance is being immortalized in satire. Rick and Morty's upcoming parody promises to dig even deeper into her controversies, exaggerating the exact traits, entitlement, arrogance, activism overacting that critics have already latched onto. For Rachel, it's not just another round of bad headlines. It's pop culture branding her as a recurring joke, something far harder to recover from than a single flop. What began as a career-defining opportunity has spiraled into a cautionary tale about public image, franchise loyalty, and the fine line between empowerment and alienating the very fans you need. Whether you agree with her, take on the 1937 classic or not, the storm that followed has cemented her Snow White in a very different place in Hollywood history, not as a triumph, but as a warning. And as the dust settles, the numbers and the headlines tell the same story. Disney bet on Rachel Zegler to carry one of its most treasured legacies, and instead ended up with a symbol of how arrogance, poor messaging, and ignoring the audience can turn a fairy tale into a fiasco. Disney's Snow White was supposed to be a crown jewel in the studio's endless run of live-action remakes, a celebration of one of the most iconic fairy tales ever brought to screen. Instead, it opened to just $45 million. A number far below expectations for a film with this much brand recognition and marketing power. But the disappointment didn't stop at the box office. On IMDb, the movie plummeted to an astonishingly low 1.6, making it one of the worst-rated Disney productions of all time. This wasn't just a commercial failure, it was a cultural one. And for Rachel Zegler, the face of the film, once hailed as the next big thing in Hollywood, it marked one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in recent memory. Audiences didn't merely skip the film, they celebrated its collapse. The movie's downfall became meme material, the subject of internet punchlines, YouTube takedowns, and entire Reddit threads titled "How Not to Market a Movie." Yet the chaos didn't end with poor reviews and empty theaters. In a bizarre twist that blurred the line between scandal and satire, a fake OnlyFans account using AI-generated images of Rachel went viral online. It wasn't her, it had nothing to do with her, but it didn't matter. Thousands followed it, joked about it, and even spread the images as if they were real. The disturbing part wasn't the account itself, it was how many people believed it, if only for a moment. Rachel's public image had deteriorated so much that an impersonation like this didn't strike people as shocking or outrageous. It struck them as believable. That's how far the perception of her had unraveled. In Hollywood, perception is everything. And following the Snow White fallout, insiders say studios began to change their tone. Projects that once had Rachel's name at the top of casting lists quietly went in other directions. Roles that had been rumored to be hers disappeared into development limbo. Deals she might once have been attached to were suddenly recast, delayed, or simply never mentioned again. No studio executive came out and said it directly, but behind closed doors. The message was clear. Rachel Zegler was now seen as a liability, a risk not worth taking. The personal side of her life wasn't immune to the turbulence either. Rachel and her longtime partner, Josh Andres Rivera, who she had met during West Side Story, were once considered one of Hollywood's rising power couples. But in the shadow of the Snow White backlash, their relationship reportedly fell apart. Friends close to the pair suggested that the relentless media scrutiny, the online vitriol, and the sheer pressure of the controversy created strains they couldn't overcome. What should have been a private heartbreak quickly became another headline in Rachel's saga: the Disney princess who lost her prince. It fed the narrative of a star unraveling in real time, and then came the moment every public figure quietly dreads. Rick and Morty entered the conversation. The show, infamous for its ruthless satire, aired a follow-up to its earlier Snow White parody. This time, the target was unmistakable. The episode, titled Snow Woke the Woke Princess, featured a blatant stand-in for Rachel Zegler named Rachel Z. In typical Rick and Morty fashion, the parody didn't hold back. It mocked the idea of rewriting fairy tales into empowerment lectures, portraying her character as banning the prince, replacing the dwarfs with ethically optimized companions, and delivering long, self-important monologues to townspeople who were visibly bored out of their minds. The episode's climax, a chaotic meltdown during a fake late-night talk show, ended with even Cartman from South Park appearing, left speechless by the absurdity. For Rachel, this wasn't just another jab. It was a cultural alarm bell ringing at full volume. Rick and Morty doesn't go after just anyone. The show reserves its sharpest parodies for figures whose behavior has tipped into the absurd, whether it's presidents, tech moguls, or celebrities who can't escape their own controversies. For Rachel to be immortalized in that hall of satire was less a punchline and more a eulogy for the Hollywood it girl status she once held. Could she turn it around? Possibly. Others have been roasted by Rick and Morty or lampooned in pop culture, only to rebuild their careers later. But Rachel's situation is uniquely difficult. Between the box office collapse, the viral memes, the AI scandals, and the growing silence from industry insiders, her reputation isn't just bruised, it's fractured. Any comeback would require something close to reinvention, a complete reset of her public persona and career choices. In Hollywood, the spotlight is unforgiving. One year you can be Disney's chosen princess, poised to lead a billion-dollar franchise. The next, you're the subject of memes, fake profiles, and satirical annihilation. For Rachel Zegler, Snow White was meant to be her coronation. Instead, it became her downfall. And now, the entire industry, and the audience that once rooted for her, is watching closely to see whether she can somehow piece it back together, or if her story will remain one of Hollywood's most infamous cautionary tales.